Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Jama and I will be giving a presentation about artificial intelligence in the healthcare industry. So just to give a brief introduction, artificial intelligence has the potential to transform healthcare. And some ways that it can do that is it can improve claims processing, medical coding, clinical trials, diagnoses, personalized care, hospital operations, and other administrative functions. But with that said, AI success depends heavily on the quality of data, interoperable systems opposed to traditional legacy systems, human oversight, and ethical considerations. Now, jumping into an industry overview, healthcare organizations are adopting artificial intelligence. One of the main areas is an area where computer assistance already was prevalent, and that's in administrative functions. So administrative functions are a major area in which AI has been adopted, and this includes in claims adjudication, medical coding, forecasting and scheduling, and resource allocation, among other things. One of the biggest benefits to using AI is it can reduce manual workload and human errors. But also a consideration to think about is that legacy systems limit AI's abilities. So some of the current uses of artificial intelligence in the healthcare industry have to do with resource allocation and planning. So think about the manual labor that these tasks take humans to do and how much more efficiently artificial intelligence can do these things. Finance, very good with processing numbers. Patient risk prediction, okay, so as long as it has good data input, it could give you pretty good outputs and risk predictions. Forecasting and simulations, drug development, marketing and patient communication. A great example of artificial intelligence being used was Pfizer used artificial intelligence to accelerate COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials, and that's something that, right, we needed something immediately to mitigate the risk of COVID-19, and artificial intelligence was used in clinical trials to speed the development of those drugs up. So one of the major or core business problems in the healthcare industry is that a lot of money is wasted. Okay, and a lot of this money is wasted in the administrative function side of healthcare, where, for example, medical coders and people are trying to get claims, and some of these claims have errors in data. Um, you know, Claims processing, medical coding require a lot of manual labor, and AI can make this process much more efficient, kind of fill that gap or that lack of efficiency that we see, or solve a problem that we see. So, for example, we could look at medical coding, and over 55,000 codes exist. And instead of doing this manually or traditional ways of like looking up these codes, having artificial intelligence systems kind of sift through information, and they could do it so much faster than a human can, is really beneficial. Um, but the issue with it, and this goes back to data quality, is that healthcare data is usually fragmented by legacy systems. So old traditional systems that might be, for example, in one singular hospital, and it's not spread among, all of the different healthcare institutions or organizations or agencies that a patient might go see. There's also outdated systems, and they're outdated due to they're lacking interoperability. And so, for example, if let's say you go to one hospital and something may be updated there, and you get healthcare provided at another institution or agency or organization, they might not know of all of these updates in your healthcare record. Um, it's also healthcare data is difficult to share in real time. I know there was a TED Talk video that we watched, for example, and they gave the example of an inhaler, you know, and that could kind of read and track what is going on when, someone has an asthma attack, or what triggers that happens, and that's an example of like artificial intelligence or a product that is reading something in real time. And how is that shared with your healthcare provider or your healthcare provider and other people that may treat you? This lack of interoperability goes a long way, and or the lack of data that could be transmitted to artificial intelligence to really make a difference. So now that we have kind of went over the problem, now we got to go over what the solutions are. And one of the solutions is to build interoperable and connected systems that update. And for example, we're big on the cloud development nowadays. If one hospital updates an electronic health record, can this be spread to other hospitals or other places that provide patient care? The second solution is to figure out systems or figure out ways of entering quality data. Artificial intelligence is really good at processing and making things more efficient, but it can only work with the data that is input into it. And so it's very important that quality data gets put into it. And that is a solution, is just making sure or ensuring that quality data is being put into these systems. Another solution is systems that update and sync in real time. So I gave you the example of the asthma inhaler and figuring out what triggers, a patient's symptoms. That is something that's very useful. And, having systems that can update or provide that data can really help medical professionals provide the best healthcare. And then on the administrative side, we can use AI to screen claims to reduce errors. So a lot of claims, they're submitted and they have mistakes, and this leads to delays or denials. And so AI can be used to screen these or to catch these mistakes or avoid, the whole delays in general. And patients need care, and delayed care is not good. And then also, AI can help staff with medical coding. As I mentioned before, it could sift through 55,000 codes and help make a recommendation. It could help them prioritize patient care, someone who's in dire need of care versus someone who, it's not as urgent. And just patient care decisions in general, which this goes also back to quality data. To make a good decision, we need good data that will inform us in what we need to do in the healthcare industry. Now we are going to go into how AI impacts some of our broader fields or concerns, such as social and economic considerations. And something that I want to reiterate is AI is only as good as the data it uses. And so as we do this, you'll see that there is a need for a human element. Okay, although people may find that AI is going to replace jobs, and it could. Entry-level roles may be reduced or eliminated because these systems do things so efficiently, and some of these entry-level roles may not be necessary anymore. With that said, there are going to be other opportunities, and employees will need to be trained or open to use new technologies such as artificial intelligence or different systems to get their jobs done. Experienced employees will still be needed. These outputs, for example, if bad data goes in and bad outputs are put out, or bad information for decision making, for example, humans need to review these AI outputs and detect errors because the computer might not detect it, especially if there's bad data being put in. And humans need to be used for contextual understanding. Sometimes a computer cannot process the context, or the context in general is not included in the data sets. And so that's something to think about. Also, organizational benefits. So these organizations or agencies, healthcare agencies, they're going to face lower administrative costs by adopting AI. They're also going to see more efficient work and better resource allocation, and hopefully reduce claim denials and delays by having AI screen things and having more efficient and more accurate inputs into these claims, so that it'll mitigate these denials and delays in patient care. Another broader concern is the environmental concerns. As usual, increased AI adoption will increase the data center demand. We need these data centers, and with an increase in data centers, this will increase the demand for electricity or energy. And then, AI also increases carbon emissions. As we have to update systems, computer systems in hospitals, this could also lead to an increase in electronic waste, especially when there are cycles in which we need to get rid of old equipment and bring new equipment in to keep up with the technology or with the artificial intelligence. And so, these are things moving forward that we have to consider. How do we make this sustainable? How do we ensure that the environment is not impacted or impacted to, or mitigate the impacts to the environment? As far as ethics are concerned, we've already gone over this throughout the class and throughout the readings. There are plenty of examples of AI being biased. It can learn how to be biased, especially based on data that we input into it. AI can discriminate. Then you add the sensitive information that we're dealing with in the healthcare industry. Patient privacy and data are concerns. There's sensitive information. And then, when we put this information or this data in, and depending on what we get out, if we make a bad decision based on a recommendation from artificial intelligence, who's going to be accountable? Not only accountability, but is there going to be transparency? How will we know what or the conclusion that artificial intelligence came up with, or what the output was? Can we figure that out? Will we be able to see that? What safeguards are there? Medical professionals, for example, a lot of the roles require licensure. What about coders? Coders are creating these systems. A lot of medical professionals are not. What kind of coder education are we going to go through, or have these people have, or are they collaborating with medical professionals? What kind of human oversight is going to be necessary, or put into legislation, or put into regulation and governance? These are all things that we need to think about when considering, ethics in the healthcare industry and the use of artificial intelligence. As far as regulation and governance, there still is no single federal law regarding AI, but there's oversight from various agencies. Artificial intelligence and its use falls under a number of different agencies and what they review. For example, the FDA, they review AI-enabled medical devices. And they could kind of determine what products are, they pre-review them. And then there's HIPAA and high-tech, privacy protections, and obviously they can kind of have some oversight over artificial intelligence and its use, because patients do have privacy protections. There are state laws, and so these are very regional. They're not, across the United States. But some examples, Colorado has AI anti-discrimination laws. Texas, on the other hand, allows AI-supported care in the medical profession, but they require that this information, or these suggestions or recommendations are reviewed by professionals. So in summary, AI can make healthcare more efficient and accurate, but it really requires quality data and a strong data infrastructure. For example, are there systems in place, and are these systems interoperable? Is this data being updated? Interoperability is key in a lot of ways, and not only that, but just what is input. If we have high quality data, we're going to get better outputs and better predictions. With that said, human oversight is still necessary in many ways. And then, the broader impact is still something to think about. The ethical, environmental, privacy, and regulatory concerns still exist. So as far as a personal reflection, I think about data a lot, both in my background in computer information systems and IT, as well as, in the MBA world. And we think about data, and data is just raw numbers, and data is only meaningful when it is turned or transformed into information. And I think about this a lot, especially it's relevant to the healthcare industry. For healthcare professionals to have the best information, they must have quality data input in the first place. This makes a huge, huge difference on how meaningful, how useful, how accurate and efficient artificial intelligence can be for the healthcare industry. But, the reality of that is that maybe it's not ever going to get there to where we can have absolute accurate quality data all the time, with all the privacy protections, with all the regulatory concerns. So we should not rely on AI, and we need humans that will place information into context and review information for errors, and that's the safest way to go about it. Use both humans and artificial intelligence in tandem, as opposed to relying on one or the other. We need to combine both of them, so that we have both efficiency, but we also have humans that can detect errors and can see context and can see things that maybe aren't seen by a computer. Thanks for watching this presentation. Here are my references, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.